Chuseok. Chuseok is the Korean version of Thanksgiving. On Chuseok weekend, the day before the actual Chuseok, I was just finished partying with some friends, and we were about to leave to go home when a taxi cab hit a pedestrian in the middle of the street. I was still adjusting to the light levels outside with the darkness and the street lamps. I didn't see the impact. I heard the screeching tires, and there was no sound. When the cab hit, there was no sound, but this woman screamed, and I saw a pile of clothes in front of the cab. I thought that's what it was. That happens sometimes. Clothes fall out of somebody's car, and another car comes and they slam on the brakes thinking it's a person, and but people started running up, and the pile of clothes was big, and there was a person in them. 25-year-old man. The windshield was smashed, and the guy was semi-conscious. He's laying there moaning softly. Sometimes he'd roll over. This was one of those places where I knew exactly where I was, and I could describe it to the police, but there were 3 Koreans already on their phones, natives that could explain details that I wouldn't have or be able to explain in Korean. They kept trying to pick him up, and that's you never pick up somebody that's been hurt like that, because if they have a broken bone, it'll cut an artery, it'll cut the spinal cord. You could kill the guy instantly. Eventually, I had to mime a broken bone to get the Koreans to stop, and then they started to discourage the man from getting up. And then suddenly, he was quiet and very still, and I said, "Uh-oh." I put my glasses against his nose, and my glasses didn't fog up. I put my index finger and middle finger to the side of his neck. No pulse. And the next 2 seconds were the most intense of the whole time for me, because things in the United States that are common sense are not always common sense in Korea, and vice versa. So I'm wondering, do Korean people know about CPR? Maybe only medics are allowed to perform it. If they know about CPR, do they also know that you almost have to crack a rib or else you didn't do it right? Do they know that breaking ribs is common? How are they going to react if I put my lips on this unconscious man's face and start breaking his ribs? Will my expired CPR card from the United States, which is not in my possession, be sufficient to indemnify me against a lawsuit? Do Good Samaritan laws exist in Korea in any form, and do they extend to registered aliens? All this flooded through my head at the same time, and when it was over, I located the xiphoid process bone, measured 4 fingers upwards to the sternum, and I was about to begin compressions, and then he moaned and turned his head. So he came back. It was probably only 5-10 minutes until the police car got there, but it was so long. The time was so long, and the Koreans were discouraging him from getting up. Finally, the cop car came, and a few minutes later, the ambulance came, and I said something poetic to Lee, something like, "Our usefulness here is nearly at its end. One more thing remains for us to do. It's time for us to get out of the way." So I left, and Lee and all the Koreans immediately followed. They were getting out of the ambulance, but they didn't have a backboard or a neck brace, and I wanted to tell them, I wanted to insist, but I definitely knew that even if I was a qualified EMT, which I am not, I would not have jurisdiction here, and I had no business telling these people their business. So I left. I thought about that guy for weeks. I asked some of the Korean friends I have if they would be allowed to tell me what had happened. And they asked me if I knew which hospital he went to, and I had no idea and didn't know the guy's name, so that was kind of the end of it. But it was very intense to watch someone slipping away right in front of you. This is the third such time that I've seen it happen. The first was a man that had been hit by a car before I got there. He had a 4-inch gash on the back of his head that I don't know how deep it went. It probably went all the way in, but there was blood clotting it. So much blood filled the street. I mean, if you had asked me how much blood he lost, I would have said all of it. And yet, he was still breathing, and his heart was beating. His pupils were sluggishly and unequally reactive, which is indicative of brain damage, which no surprise there from the injury. But his eyes were open. His breathing was mechanical. It was like whatever it was that made him alive was no longer really there. His body just didn't know it yet. The driver was actually, he seemed nervously cheerful. He was walking around. I did a quick psych eval on him. You know, he couldn't remember who the previous vice president had been. Well, I mean, he remembered, but he gave me the current one. He really wasn't there, and the passenger was his wife, absolutely distraught. She was she was more in present time, but she was distraught. I was about to relay vital statistics when the ambulance pulled up, so I got out of the way. And then the time after that was my grandmother passing. She'd had another stroke and she had a living will, and no feeding, no IVs. I visited her every day. I kept her as comfortable as I could. And then finally she passed. She was 86 or so. A human being can live without food or water for 7 days. She was so strong that she was on her eighth. Amazing strong woman. And I'm not even sure why I'm telling you all this. It keeps coming up in my mind, and maybe if I just say it out loud, it'll, I don't know, go away. Anyway, this is the Chuseok Incident. And the rest of the weekend was rather interesting. That Friday, I just went home, didn't do anything. Saturday, I slept most of the day, and I got a pizza that night, and it was weird. On the floor was this envelope. It was too thin to contain anything. I just ignored it. But for some reason, it bothered me. It was just trash, but it bothered me. So I picked it up, and it was a bank envelope. And having held it, the weight and the thickness, I knew there couldn't possibly be anything in it. So I put it on the table, and it still bothered me. So I picked it up and I held it up to the light, and there was something in it. And I opened up the envelope, and it had some of the 50,000 won notes in it. Those are the largest paper currency that Korea currently has at the time of this recording. I asked the woman sitting across from me if it was hers. And then she said no, so I handed it in to the proprietress of the pizza school in Junpyeong. She did not say thank you, but what she did do is tear a new one in the person that had lost it. The next day, I went on a double date with a good friend of mine with these two sisters who were gynecological nurses. Beautiful, beautiful women, wretched personality. I'll never go out with them again. But when When I did go out with them, I went to the ATM and someone had left their ATM card behind. And the whole time I'm thinking, how much more temptation am I going to have? I already turned in some money. Now I have an ATM card no one's going to be able to trace. I asked my date to call the number on the back, but she said just tear up the card and break the microchip. That's the best thing you can do. If you turn it in, somebody else will just use it. So that's what I did. And then the next day there was that guy that got hit by the car. So since each day was getting more and more intense, the Monday that I had off, I didn't leave my house. This has been another edition of the Dave Experience. Talk to you later.